Revelation 12 is an allegory of an eclipse on March 20th, 71 CE. Embedded in this allegory is the first known story of the birth of Jesus. A great and wondrous sign appeared in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, with the moon under her feet, and a crown of 12 stars on her head. She was pregnant and cried out in pain as she was about to give birth. Then another sign appeared in heaven, an enormous red dragon. The dragon stood in front of the woman who was about to give birth, so that he might devour her child the moment it was born. She gave birth to a son, a male child, who will rule all the nations with an iron scepter, and her child was snatched up to God and to his throne. The woman fled into the desert to a place prepared for her by God, where she might be taken care of for 1260 days. The great dragon was hurled down. He was hurled to the earth. When the dragon saw that he had been hurled to the earth, he pursued the woman who had given birth to the male child. The woman was given the 2 wings of a great eagle, so that she might fly to the place prepared for her in the desert, where she would be taken care of for a time, times, and a half time. Then the dragon was enraged at the woman and went off to make war against the rest of her offspring, those who obey God's commands and hold to the testimony of Jesus. This story, embedded in the 71 CE allegory, was determined by the spirit of apocalypse. In other words, this story was revealed. It was not real. It was determined by the stars. And perhaps the most important thing about this allegory is that it appears in Acts of Pilate, the Gospel of James, and the Gospel of Matthew. The 12 stars only represent the 12 tribes of Israel. The pregnant woman eventually became the story of Mary, mother of Jesus. The red dragon eventually became the story of Herod pursuing Mary and Jesus. The escape to the wilderness eventually became the escape to Egypt. And finally, the dragon waging war against the rest of her offspring eventually became a story of Herod slaughtering the infants. Of the 3 birth accounts to have this story, the closest is the Gospel of James. According to the Gospel of James, after the birth of Jesus, Jesus was placed in an ox cart and disappeared. Mary vanishes at this point. Also of note, in the Gospel of James, the only modern objection to the text being earlier than Matthew is a very poor assumption about the 7 virgins of the temple. These 7 virgins were not Vestal virgins of Rome. They were representatives of the Hyades cluster in the Revelation 6 eclipse account. Both Revelation 6 and Revelation 12 were combined to make up the Gospel of James. The first story of the infancy of Jesus was not in Matthew. It was in the book of Revelation, chapter 12.